they gave her a $125 speeding ticket.
Just like little devils.
Yeah. Welcome to Mind Over Matter. Today it's a pleasure to have Larry Bloom, who's an attorney and senior partner with Bloom and Beull, who's done a lot of work with medical malpractice and worked a lot with families. I think often had to deal with angry families. So I thought today it would be helpful if we could talk a little bit about when families are angry at doctors, maybe talk a little bit about what that's all about. So maybe we could start with that, you know, based on your experience.
That's a good place to start. I think, oddly enough, that many people might feel that people get angry with doctors because they feel that the doctor has done something wrong. And it would be in those instances where the doctor maybe did do something wrong. But as a matter of fact, the vast majority of instances in which the doctor did something wrong do not result in anger. They often don't even result in awareness. The principal reason why people get angry with doctors is because they're surprised. Now that surprise can often come in many different ways. Most of the time it exhibits itself when an untoward event occurs. They weren't expecting a complication to develop. It hadn't been either explained to them or adequately explained to them. And as a result, when it occurs, they're frightened, they're surprised, and they become angry. Even more so, of course, with the family members who may not have been even in on what the doctor was telling the patient and have even less information to go on. But surprise is actually the primary cause. The second biggest cause is not having done something wrong either. The second biggest cause is the feeling of abandonment. That comes often when there has been an untoward event and the physician, either having never been trained in the subject or having just some natural human reactions, withdraws from the situation because of the untoward event. Becomes less communicative, becomes harder to find, and actually is pulling back because this event has occurred. I would say if you put those two together, you have 90% of the reason why people get angry with doctors. I think you probably know, since you have done some work in this field yourself, that, for example, a very small percentage, maybe 5% of all the people who have a negligent performance with respect to their care ever do anything about it by way of a claim.
And who know about it.
Right. Well, of course, the vast majority don't know about it, and even those who do know about it. I've had some instances, for example, where a doctor reacts appropriately when something has occurred and moves in to fill that area of surprise and shock, and can actually work with the family as they work through whatever complication has developed. And even though there may have been a modicum of negligence involved, the family is so impressed, they do nothing about the fact that it may have been a mishap on the part of the physician in the first place, because they're so pleased with the reaction. I remember 20 years ago giving a talk at the Massachusetts General Hospital and at the Brigham and Women's Hospital on the subject of forming an alliance with your patients. The physician-patient alliance. Dr. Gutheil and I spoke on the subject of agreeing at the very beginning to be totally honest with your patient, right from the beginning, before you even begin the treatment, and continuing that through, even though mishaps may occur. In the instance of anger, acting against a physician, making a claim, bringing a suit, the incidence falls tremendously in those circumstances.
But you're suggesting that you had to give a lecture and train physicians in truth-telling as opposed to what were they learning?
Well, of course, maybe in your specialty, they have some training in this field, but orthopedic surgeons or people who fix your blood vessels have had little or no training in how to respond when there has been a mishap or an untoward event. They are virtual babes in the woods when it comes to that. They often rely on the house officers, that is the young doctors in the hospital, or the nurses to deal with the emergency while they try to get recomposed again because they hadn't expected it themselves and didn't want to see it happen and feel ashamed about it. And so they withdraw. And we actually have to go out and give classes saying that's not a good idea for any number of reasons. I mean, one of the reasons they give, although I don't think it's true, one of the reasons they give for withdrawing is they're afraid that they'll get themselves embroiled in a lawsuit or a claim. I think the real reason is that they don't know how to deal with it.
But it's I guess I'm smiling a little bit because if I can put it into modern day parlance, you're almost suggesting that managed care doesn't allow for a patient-doctor relationship to evolve, and it's kind of necessary to go back and sort of teach that because it's not being taught in the curriculum when so much of it seems like garden variety common sense.
Well, of course, you get this particularly in the specialties. There is at least some vestige left, even with managed care, with primary care physicians, in establishing a relationship with their patients. First name sort of thing, asking about the family, even if it only takes a few seconds, and trying to keep a relationship going in a primary care setting. But with someone who has come in to basically do a mechanical job on your body and then leave, there's no time allowed for that. The physicians have no training in it, and they have no experience in it, and the specialties really have a great deal of difficulties dealing with bad events. And I'm not saying that all the bad events are the result of somebody having done something wrong. But since there's no relationship at all between lawsuits that are brought and things that go wrong, there's virtually no connection between the two. There is also no connection between the reaction of the physician and whether or not he's done anything wrong. The reaction is the same all the time. If there's a mishap, they begin to withdraw. And the patients are surprised. They need more from the physician, more explanation and more of a description and more of an alliance with the physician to work through this mishap. And at that very moment, the doctor is withdrawing. Apparently, Dr. Guthal and I were a total failure since the problem still exists after 20 years after we gave our talk. Either that or we have to give them again.
Well, either that or maybe rethink who goes to medical school.
I suppose there's that. But I don't think that... I think they could do some work on the curriculum at medical schools. Not everything is going to be fixed and turn out the way you'd like it to. And there is no training on what a physician is supposed to do then. In fact, there really is no, in medical school, there's no claim that there's anything, any job you have to do if in that setting.
So let's go back. So how does a physician, in terms of fostering an alliance with a family, well, patient and family, sort of take the element of surprise out of the mix?
Well, there is of course, you would give the usual informed consent. I'm sure that you've talked about informed consent many times in the course of doing these programs. That has to be given in a more personal way than it frequently is. Frequently, the doctor is talking faster than those automobile ads on what might happen and what might not happen. The patient shuts down because you're talking about death and all this sort of stuff, which is very unlikely to occur, but somebody feels that that has to be done. And so you have informed consent has to be slowed down and given in more workable fashion without worrying so much.
And by the primary physician, not...
By the person who's going to be there on the scene, right. And next, there is a window between an untoward event and the reaction of the patient to it. And that it's a small window. But if the physician is not there, if the physician does not come in during that window of time, that window of opportunity, you've really lost the chance to deal with the possibility of shock, surprise, amazement, anger, all of those perfectly natural reactions when you've gone in, you know, to have your toe operated on and you end up having some sort of a seizure. People don't normally see any connection between those two events, and so when it happens, they are frightened, shocked, surprised, and that is the very moment when the physician should be there to tell them exactly what happened, why it happened, cut the biology down to usable terminology, and get the person in contact with what it is that happened and why it happened. That can take the fright and the shock right out of the situation, or at least cut it down to a manageable proportion. But only if the physician is capable of doing that. And the physician is, if he hasn't or she hasn't had any training in that field, is at their worst at that moment, because they're dealing with the mishap too. It's not as if it has no impact on a physician when something happens. So I feel that to say that that physicians, when they commit malpractice, all of a sudden the walls go up and all that sort of thing, and so there's a relationship between angry families and the doctor having done something wrong, doesn't exist. It is a matter of a mishap that has not been dealt with properly. Now, of course, you can also get people angry at doctors because they don't show up when they're supposed to and all that sort of thing, and when they do, they don't explain it. Explanations are very short, especially with specialists. Your personal care physician, again, may take a moment to tell you what a horrible day she's had and why she's behind and everything, and to, you know, give you an apology. But your neurosurgeon probably won't, often won't anyway.
All right, well, we'll take a break, and then maybe we can kind of elaborate on sort of some of the roads that lead to litigation. Thank you.
Okay.
Sweetheart, smoke outside now. You promise.
Okay, hon.
Sweetheart, smoke outside now. You promise.
What kind of man are you?
I'm a father.
Look here, my father was a father, and he smoked his brains out in the house.
Watch as he blows those smoke rings on my little red face.
You probably have asthma.
Asthma, schmasthma. I'm telling you, nothing's gonna happen to your kids.
Don't swear when you're lying. You know very well that thousands of kids get bronchitis, ear infections, and even pneumonia from their parents' cigarette smoke. And didn't you promise your little angels you'd smoke outside?
Hey, Daddy. Hi, Dad.
Those little devils are just so sweet.
Do the right thing.
Please, smoke outside.
Until you can stop, go out for your kids.
Take the pledge. Call 1-800-513-1157.
We are under environmental alert. Local schools have been closed and outdoor activities should be limited.
Pollution-related respiratory illnesses are on the rise, especially among children and the elderly.
Please be sure that your children stay inside.
Every year, tens of thousands of people die prematurely due to air pollution. Poor air quality costs us millions of dollars in medical expenses, and the productivity of Latin American cities and businesses is diminished. Vehicle emissions represent the most important source of air pollution in Latin American cities. The reduction of air pollution is not an impossible challenge. We need to promote the use of cleaner fuels in vehicles and improve public transportation. The Clean Air Initiative for Latin American cities, building partnerships for a cleaner and healthier Latin America.
So let's continue then. The road to litigation. What prompts families to finally decide that that's what avenue they are going to pursue?
Well, I think the statistics would indicate that it is not an instance of malpractice which then leads to litigation, such that there would be a correlation that a large percentage of the malpractice is then followed by a claim or a lawsuit. There are so many ways that this can be short-circuited. Litigation requires somebody to be disappointed or upset. So you get through this whole shock, anger thing that we talked about earlier in the program. And then we have to move into the area of attorneys. Now, one thing you need, of course, is you need to have a person who's been badly injured. And you need to have somebody suggest, or the person themselves think, that things are solved with attorneys. Many people just won't go near an attorney no matter what's happened to them. Their mommy told them that it was not a good idea to hang out with lawyers, which is probably true, and they follow that advice through their lives. They just stay away from lawyers. They'll say, no, I don't want to sue anybody. Sometimes there'll be a family member, a particular family member, who has some connection with a legal matter. Either they tend to be somewhat litigious themselves, or they work in a legal setting of some kind, or they themselves have been sued in some instances, and they will prompt the person going to the lawyer. Now that starts the process of asking for litigation. But then you have to go into a much more complicated area, which is, will any attorney be interested in bringing the litigation on your behalf? Litigation in these areas, in the area of forensic medicine, is very expensive. It requires retaining experts, which I can get to later. But you have to spend a lot of money in this litigation. There will be fairly aggressive defense brought up by the healthcare industry or the physician insurance company.
By you.
Whoever it is. By me in many instances. And so the lawyers who are prone to represent patients, claimants, know that they're in for an expensive ride. And they have to have a case that's going to result in either a large settlement or a large verdict if they can help it. And so if you have a few weeks of extreme discomfort as a result of an act of malpractice, you're not going to find anyone interested in making a lawsuit out of it. It's just not going to happen because the lawyer sees that the money is just not going to be there to finance this type of a defense. In fact, it's one of the arguments against using litigation in order to channel medical care or use it as some sort of a tool, because it was intended to be a tool. It's very expensive. A lawyer has to be willing to take it. A lawyer has to be able to get enough information together in order to allow an expert to take a look at it. And therefore, there has to be a trail of what happened. Some mishaps are unknowable. You can tell from the result that something happened. You can tell what might have occurred. But for example, I mean, so many people are unconscious when events occur because they've been rendered unconscious by an anesthesiologist. So many people were expecting a bad result. They just got the wrong bad result. And so trying to weed out all that and filter through is going to be very difficult. And then we get to the subject of an expert. You have to have somebody willing to give an opinion that some physician did something wrong. Now, at one time, back when I was much younger and was starting out in the practice, you had to get a physician in the community to say that the other physician did something wrong. And it made it almost impossible to bring litigation because you'd be talking about this person's peers right there in the community, not some sort of a general peer, but the person that they, you know, that they went to luncheons with and practiced medicine in the same hospital with. And so that made it very, very difficult. We unfortunately have now come to another plateau in the area, and we now have experts who are available on an 800 line. It's very similar to the situation. There's so much money involved in rendering an opinion in a malpractice case and enabling people to continue with their litigation that, as for example, police officers in the drug trade can often be won over to the other side by the enormous amount of money that is available to just work its way through to otherwise decent, honest people. The same thing is true with physicians. There are some physicians who are being squeezed in their health maintenance organization situation. They had thought they were going to make a lot more money than they're making. Their expectations have been dashed as far as becoming extremely wealthy in the practice of medicine. And here are tens of thousands of dollars waiting for them if they will just give an opinion that the attorney would like to hear. And so unfortunately, we do have a small number of physicians who give inappropriate opinions that are really medically not justifiable. Either there's not enough information for them to have given that opinion, and yet they give it, or the opinion is actually contrary to the standard practice. And that's very, it's unfortunate that that is happening, but it does happen when you're talking about big money situations. It happens in any kind of a setting like that, where there's much money to be made. People will begin to become flexible, let's say, and cooperative, and the next thing you know, they're totally co-opted.
I mean, they have a price.
Yes. As a result, that skews even further the total lack of similarity between the instances of malpractices and the instances of litigation. There's almost no connection. Anyone who makes the claim that that attorneys can send a message and change the way people practice medicine and all that sort of thing by doing litigation is not in touch with the actual facts of the situation. You often hear that in the setting of litigation where an attorney will say, we want to send a message to such and such a place, but that's just part of the role-playing that's going on. There's no message being conveyed, and that's very unfortunate. But the litigation, most families are not interested in making a ton of money. They become swept up in the whole situation. The lawyers begin to control the whole scene, and the experts supply their bit. And so many families have no idea of what's going on. And they might have been expecting $10,000 and they end up with $1 million, or they might have been expecting $5 million and they end up with $35,000. They don't have, in many instances, a real contact with what the value is at a court of law.
But at the inception, maybe you'd comment a little bit on sort of the motivation. For example, we shared a case where, at least it struck me, that the moving party was dealing with her own sense of guilt.
Yes.
And somehow the litigation was her way of kind of blaming someone else other than herself for the untoward event.
Well, you certainly have that, especially in cases involving suicides, or people who have elective surgery that a family member really prompted them and sort of pushed them to go get. You'll have that in the setting of psychiatry, where the family of a suicide really wants the jury, 12 people, to tell them that it wasn't their fault, that it was this doctor's fault. You have instances where a person goes in to have parts of their anatomy changed in order to keep a spouse happy or other members of the family happy, but not really dissatisfied themselves with the shape their body is in. And it doesn't turn out right. And the person who prompted them to do this, you often have this in breast reductions, you have this in people who have implants. The spouse feels so guilty, the family member, so guilty about having forced this person into a situation where then there was, for example, a terrible infection that left huge scars on the body instead of the beautification that they'd expected. That family member will often be the, when you go to depositions, the questioning of the various parties, the really angry person. And the one who seems bitter is often the spouse rather than the actual injured party, because they had banked so much on having this person look different, and they had pushed it and prompted it, and now look what happened, and they feel guilty and ashamed. And also disappointed. They wanted Farrah Fawcett, and they didn't get Farrah Fawcett. Now they've got this person with scars. We used to have a number of dental cases in which people thought that if they had their teeth straightened and whitened and fixed, that they would begin to look like a movie star. And actually, they look like themselves with straight teeth. And the dentist would get sued for pain, temporal mandibular joint pain, and pain of all different kinds, sort of non-specific pain in the face area. What they really were talking about was they had expected to look gorgeous, and they don't. And so you end up with a dentist who's been sued. Expectations, shame will do it. Sometimes the person actually knows that there was malpractice and wants either punishment, or what they don't realize, of course, is that the punishment doesn't come in the fashion that they would like it to. Most often, they're as punished as the doctor is by the system, which requires you to be cross-examined and grilled by professional, trained people who know how to tear you apart. At the end of all of it, you wish you'd never done it, even if you win sometimes. It just doesn't lead to it. But you do have a lot of shame, guilt, embarrassment, discouragement, disappointment leading to litigation, rather than the actual happening of an act of malpractice. I keep going back to that.
You do. That's interesting. Well, let's take a break and maybe, pick up on that and look a little bit more at kind of how it all evolves.
Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome to a land of law, a place ruled by the dinosaur, where cactus-clad mountains spew lava and smoke, and craters hide inquisitive folk, where wise old turtles share their views on creatures with red vests and powder blue shoes. There's so much to Galapagos, so much we could say. 'Twould be most preposterous if it all went away.
What do you want to leave your children, the story or the place that inspired it? Since 1961, World Wildlife Fund has helped safeguard thousands of species like these, animals which can be found nowhere else on Earth. But in areas like the Galapagos Islands, we need your help to do more. Phone us at 1-800-CALL-WWF to find out about World Wildlife Fund's Living Planet campaign and about our free action kit, which includes information on what you can pledge to do to help leave our children a living planet.
Some younger Americans think smokeless tobacco is cool. If you like bad teeth, bad gums, bad breath, or risking cancer, smokeless tobacco contains impurities like sand and grit that'll wear down your teeth, and poisons that irritate your gums that could cause them to recede. After a while, your teeth can become sensitive to hot and cold and become decayed. A lot of people who chew tobacco destroy their gums and mouths. Not a pretty sight. It makes them look bad and smell bad. People who use smokeless tobacco have 4 times the risk as non-users of getting oral cancer. Yet many people still think smokeless tobacco is okay, except for girls. Most girls think that guys who use chewing tobacco are losers with bad breath and stained teeth, that these guys are too ashamed of their teeth to smile. So how cool is that? For the ADA Dental Minute, I'm Dr. Maria Lopez-Howell.
Well, you mentioned during the break, Larry, that there was a particular sort of a situation that you thought maybe illustrates a number of the points you're trying to make. So perhaps you could define that, and we could use it.
I've had a couple of personal instances of this because, as you know, I've had foster children who often have disabilities of one kind or another. We don't take the easy ones. If there are any. And we've also, in our work setting, because we have a forensic setting, we sometimes get involved in things of this nature. But I do recall, I'd like to talk a little bit about inappropriate community placement in this sense. We had a janitor at our office. He was a schizophrenic. He was suffering from schizophrenia, and he did a nice job of it, at least in my opinion, of fighting the battle. And everybody in the office knew his situation, and because of what we do, they were pretty easy on the whole subject. So it was a nice work environment for him. Well, he also was living in a community residence. And his father, who was in the business of providing social services, had gotten him the placement, not because it was the best place for him, because unbeknownst to all of us, he often had episodes that required a lot more care than just a standard community residence, but because the father had some plans of his own in mind. And one day we discovered that the father had moved back to Europe and left this young man.
How young is the man?
Well, he was 19 at the time.
Oh, very young. Okay.
Left him with an employer who seemed to know, to be able to deal with somebody who had difficulties of this nature, and a community residence that was able to deal with him when he was in a good setting, when he was in a good frame of mind. Well, of course, the departure of his dad with not much of a farewell led to an explosion, and there was no one there to take care of him. I was calling as an employer, to try to get him some help. The community residents finally discharged him because it turns out that when he had difficulties, he became a poly-drug abuser, and he just unraveled. They were never told that this might be an offshoot if things got bad for him, for any one of a number of reasons. And they were a pretty basic community residence. And they didn't really have the resources to deal with. This is quite a while ago, and they didn't have these resources that might possibly be available at the present time. And things just spiraled out of control because the father had not told everybody who was going to be involved in this situation what the true facts were. He had to have this young man living someplace and with a job so that he could then do what he wanted to do. And so we have a villain of the piece in that particular setting. Another happenstance, much more recent one in my situation, is a 766 placement for somebody living with us. And the town had a plan, and I knew, as did my wife, who's in the field of clinical social work, knew that this plan wasn't going to be able to deal with it, the situation. But the town was very insistent because this was going to be far less expensive for the town, and they really demanded We then had to face the situation of, do you get embroiled in an enormous amount of administrative litigation while the child just sort of flounders? And we decided that with close supervision by myself and my wife, we would sort of let things happen. So we allowed the town to make this placement, which was inside the system. And of course, it resulted in disaster. There was furniture thrown and things out of control, and the school principal practically having a seizure, and I mean, it was just got totally out of hand, as we had predicted it would. And then, of course, another placement was suggested, which was perfect, the one we'd suggested in the first place, and off we went. Now, in that particular setting...
So that did subsequently occur?
Yes, we have an excellent placement, and it's working just fine. We're very happy with the placement, which is the one we suggested in the first place, but it was much more expensive.
Yeah, but you're very sophisticated. We're talking to families. How do they go about negotiating with the system for a proper placement? I understand in the first instance maybe you had a kind of a devious parent who had a hidden agenda and was willing to accept any placement as his escape hatch. But how do families kind of negotiate? The system sometimes seems so distant, impersonal, inflexible. I'm not sure families necessarily feel empowered to pick and choose if they're looking for proper interventions and especially for proper placements.
Well, that's why we have so many difficulties in this particular area, because everybody has an agenda. Now, you would hope, and it usually is true, that the family agenda is to get proper care for their loved one. That's usually the instance. The first one I brought up was very unusual, which is why it sticks in my mind after 20 years. It's not the usual case, but the funding source is going to want the cheapest placement. I mean, they're not without a conscience, but at the same time, it's always in the back of their mind, the budget, the budget, the budget. The system may have empty beds in one place and no beds or a waiting list in another place. So the system may be moving things in a certain direction. The particular placement location may have had a bed that's been empty for so long that the bean counters back in the office are saying we have to fill that bed. And so the clinical judgment is impacted by the Greek chorus in the background saying, fill the bed, we have to get the money. I think the only way that a family can deal with this, and you don't have to be an expert in the field, because the experts are all there, they just all have an agenda, is to go around and talk to each one of these groups before, as many as you can anyway, before you agree to a placement. Go see the clinical people, if there are any, at the setting and see whether or not they feel comfortable, and be truthful with them. Tell them everything you know about what might potentially occur in this placement. Trying to downplay it may have a short-term benefit. In other words, somebody may get a bed for the weekend when they wouldn't have had a place to stay. But as long as it's only for the weekend, fine. But if you've told a story that makes the placement inappropriate, and eventually in the long term it will not be a good idea to do that. So if the family is very truthful, very upfront about what the situation may be, talk to the clinicians if you possibly can and ask, can you handle this? Have you handled this before? How many times have you handled it before? Is this a common occurrence? What would you do if this were to happen? And see if it makes sense to you. Ask the funding source. Is it because this is expensive that you're doing it? What are the reasons why you're suggesting this? Is it because there are empty beds here and there are none where I think the placement is more appropriate? Making noise doesn't hurt.
But it takes a certain amount of gumption to make noise, and
it does.
A lot of your families are going to feel, perhaps properly so, even intimidated by the system. I mean, when you, as a concerned parent or foster parent, ask questions, it's very different than when, you know, a number of families that I know, for example, would ask questions?
Well, there are advocacy groups. If you don't feel up to do it, you can try to find an advocacy group. I belong to the advocacy groups for the areas that I feel my own family needs are, and we can use them. If I have no trouble talking to anybody about anything at any time, and I can get pretty loud when I want to be. And not only that, there's an Esquire after my name, and that carries its own cachet. But advocacy groups can be very helpful. They can supply the gumption. They can also been through this a few times before, so you don't have to do it alone. I strongly recommend that people belong to both the community and the statewide groups that serve that particular
Okay,
need.
but Mr. Bloom, your request is very reasonable, and we certainly agree with you, but we have a waiting list of 19,500 for such placements. So the best we can do at this point is put you on that waiting list. What's your response to that?
I feel waiting lists, the waiting list argument, although it is certainly a valid one, in this particular setting you have to get a little selfish. This is your loved one. You can't afford to be so egalitarian and so communal that you're willing to wait your turn. I don't think it's called upon. There are a number of sources that will try to make everybody wait their turn anyway, and we don't need families to get into that at the same time. Not that you don't want to make a pest of yourself, of course. Well, although even then, it's not a bad idea. But see what the advocacy groups are recommending to people on long waiting lists. Don't just say, oh, okay, put me on the end of the list, and that's the end of it. You say, well, surely you don't go one by one. This is like an emergency room. If somebody has a problem, they get pushed up further on the list. My family member has needs that you didn't take account of, and this person should be. A little pushing in that direction is helpful. Waiting lists do exist. They're real. They have to be dealt with. In many instances, advocacy groups have gone to court. We now have, I don't know, as many as half a dozen lawsuit situations where the state is being forced to do what it should have done many years ago and get rid of these waiting lists. These advocacy groups can be very helpful. You don't take a denial of service for whatever reason, or a delay. Somebody saying, well, it would be at least 5 or 6 years before we can get you the services. That's unacceptable. Let somebody else be fair about it. You're an advocate for your family member, and you speak up and get past that waiting list argument, even though it's real. I feel as if there are enough people out there telling you to be sensible and you know, wait your turn. I don't see why we should just concede that issue.
Well, in that spirit, let's take a break and then maybe spend the last segment talking to families about what your thoughts are as a parent and an attorney on how to access better mental health care for family members.
Have you noticed that no matter how careful you are at saving money, somehow it always seems to get away? Is it part of a larger conspiracy? Or is it that you aren't putting your money in a safe, secure place? Perhaps you should be buying new U.S. savings bonds. For as little as $25, you could be earning competitive rates. And what could be safer? You can even get them indexed to inflation. And with the new Easy Saver plan, you can purchase new U.S. savings bonds automatically from your checking or savings account. You choose how much and how often before they get to it. The new Easy Saver plan for U.S. savings bonds from the U.S. Treasury. Keeping your money just got easier.
For people who have to deal with the harsh realities of life, there is hope. There is Volunteers of America. Volunteers of America has been rebuilding lives and restoring hope to people in need in communities across the country for more than 100 years. Volunteers of America is one of the nation's largest nonprofit charitable organizations, providing services for children and youth, the elderly, homeless people, families, and many others. We serve the emotional, physical, and spiritual needs of more than 1.5 million people a year. Find out how you can help. Call 1-800-899-0089 today. Volunteers of America. There are no limits to caring.
Well, let's try to be nitty-gritty, and maybe could you talk to families about thoughts you have in terms of, say, accessing better mental health care for family members?
Well, it's a very, very difficult topic. My experience is that unless you have specialized training in the field, in one of many different fields, for example, at the present time, litigation seems to be a field that's very helpful. And my wife, of course, being a clinical social worker, also has certain entree. But if a family is not otherwise affiliated, the best way to get, once you've gotten what you need, at least for the moment, for your family member, the best way is to volunteer for the advocacy and representation groups. They do wonderful, wonderful things. We have joined, we've met some wonderful people, marvelous people, very knowledgeable. When we were working through some of the issues of SSI payment for children, which we've become pretty knowledgeable about it firsthand, we saved so much time by going to a meeting which had nothing to do with SSI, but at which there would be a large number of people who had children who were on SSI, and just chat with them. We didn't have to reinvent the wheel. There were a number of different things they were able to lead us towards or away from.
Like what? I mean...
for example, the correct diagnosis to suit the Social Security Administration has very little to do with correct diagnosis for getting care. It seems awful to say, but it's true. And they were able to tell us what to stay away from. Words that if they're put in the diagnosis, the Social Security Administration immediately says, oh no, we don't recognize that, we don't honor that. Now that we're working in 688, which is the adult placement of children, we're now beginning to work in that area. You have situations, for example, where do you do the best you can to get the highest IQ test result for your child in order to, just before the 688 funding cycle begins? Or do you let them stay up late the night before and maybe not do their best? That sounds so tacky, that sounds so awful, but those are the kinds of things. Do you want a person to have a terrific test result or a test result that might otherwise qualify them under some obscure regulation? Those are things you can learn. Practical, very practical.
So it's more than just support. It's learning really, I guess, feeling empowered.
You get empowered, you learn your way through the system. Instead of wandering down an empty, obscure corridor that you've never been in before, people have given you a road map. They've told you what's at the end of that corridor. They've told you about things that make no sense to try to track down, that could be very time-consuming and take you away from your real purpose, which is to try to obtain a livable situation for your family member. Chatting at the cider and donuts is often the most rewarding part of the entire conference that you go to.
On the other hand, I mean, it kind of suggests a system of obstacles that's been put up to try to basically tax the ingenuity of creative people like yourself. I mean, why I guess, isn't a system in place that's more generously spirited in terms of making access to services? Maybe that's a naive question, but...
Well, it has a dollar bill pin to it. If a certain diagnosis is recognized as a diagnosis that will allow SSI funding, it increases the number of people who are eligible for SSI funding. They found, the Social Security Administration has found some people who said, well, that's not really a disability diagnosis, and so they were able to say, well, see, we've been told by our experts that that's not a disability diagnosis. It may be true, it may not be true, but it's what they've been told and what they've now pounded into their regulations. It's not the Larry Bloom Social Security Administration, it's the United States Social Security Administration, and if that's the way they operate, then that's the way I operate. There's no point fighting your battle in an empty field.
No, I understand, but it's as though somehow you can control the number of disabled people by limiting the access to services.
Oh, sure. They do it all the time. I mean, and even betwixt departments. Is autism a form of mental illness, or is it a form of mental retardation? You may say to yourself, who cares? The person is autistic. They need to be cared for. Well, the Department of Mental Retardation and the Department of Mental Health, they care a lot because it's their budget that has to pick up all the autistic kids, depending on what which way the diagnosis goes. Is there a federal program in place that allows this diagnosis to be treated, whereas they have to use state money to take care of a person who has this diagnosis? Well, you can be darn sure that they would like you to get the federal diagnosis because they'd prefer to spend federal money. If they have too many people in the field of retardation and they can't pay for, at least within the budget that they're willing to put up, pay for it, well, they just redefine mental retardation. It's now, instead of a 75 IQ, it's a 70 IQ. Look how few retarded we have. We've just pushed a whole number of people. They're not retarded. They have a 73 IQ. 2 years ago, they were retarded, but not anymore.
And now, if they need services, it's the responsibility of the Department of Mental Health.
Or the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission, you know, which is saying, oh my God, no, these people have no job potential. We don't want them. We'll never be able to find them a job. And so they're backpedaling. And meanwhile, the Department of Medical Assistance, which is the huge funding agency, is trying to find ways to use federal money rather than state money, and so they have to shove you into certain blocks in order to get the federal money. It's a game. The playing pieces are human beings, and so you have to be good at it.
Does the state, though, have no ability to run, in your opinion, cost-effective, readily accessible, wide-ranging services?
We'd have to have a change in the way people think about it. Mostly the bean counters, the way people they think about these things. The clinicians are there. You have excellent people who are more than capable of providing the services. But you have another person who's saying, well, that's not our department. That should be on the budget of some other department, because they're the expensive department. We operate very efficiently. We have a very low budget. As long as those kind of games are going on, it's very difficult. But to say, you know, are there psychiatrists or social workers who are not doing their job? I haven't found them. They're usually overworked. The pay is terrible. There's a fight going on now, I understand, in the State House. I don't know that much about it, but it looks to me like they won't even be able to get much of a pay raise for the poor community health and assistance workers.
So they'll continue to run 10% vacancy rates and
huge turnover.
And huge turnover, 100% in some cases.
Yes, because we're not willing to pay them. Do the ones that we have, are they poor at what they're doing? I haven't had that experience. They're saints in many instances. They're willing to work for half what they could get running a key punch machine or doing something else, working in areas that I'm not even familiar with, those computer things. but they choose to do this. They want to do this. And
so if I were to tell you that the Division of Medical Assistance, which you referenced, pays $25 million a year to a for-profit corporation to administer the mental health benefit, and for that, presumably gets that for-profit system to, quote, save money, then I were to say to you what one of my study member group members said, that is, that if you can spend $25 million to save money, why can't the Department of Medical Assistance, Division of Medical Assistance, just administer the program itself, save money, and save the $25 million to boot? You know.
You often wonder. You often wonder. A lot of it has to do with decisions being made way above the clinical level, at levels having to do with federal funding, at levels having to do with taxation, and God forbid anybody should mention elections, tax cuts. Everybody's going to get a check they weren't expecting and probably have no idea what they're going to do with it. And as a result now we're going to see cuts in the federal programs because this tax cut just had to go through because there was so much money lying around, and now all of a sudden it's dried up, and it's really awful. One has to become facile with this group of people. It is not helpful to try to remain sensible. It's necessary to get in there and talk the nonsense.
Are you getting bitter?
No, I find it actually quite amusing. I think mainly because we've had such success in doing this. Some people are not the least bit happy with it because they've not been successful. And of course, what about those who have no advocates, who have no family to gather around them?
Well, what does happen?
Well, they're homeless. They're dead. The death rate for people in that kind of a setting is enormous. And in a sense, I suppose it's a victory in the sense that it's very inexpensive to take care of a dead person. But it's nothing you certainly could be proud of. And
so if I told you the Department of Mental Health fought a suit brought by the Pine Street Inn that was to obligate it to provide continuing care to discharged psychiatric patients discharged from state programs, Department of Mental Health fought that suit, would you be surprised?
Oh, not in the least, not in the least. I was present back in the 70s when somebody at the money level discovered that it would be much cheaper to close the state hospitals than to keep them open. Even in the terrible condition that they allegedly were in, it would be much cheaper to just let everybody out. And so they did. I mean, everybody wonders why the Community Mental Health Center Act was facilitated in a very relatively short period of time, considering it take eons to get anything done around here. In no time at all, in 10 years, most of the hospitals were closed and everybody was out, and everyone said, wow, isn't that wonderful? We had an achievement here. Well, it turns out it was much cheaper, because it's much less expensive to have somebody sitting on a park bench than giving them 3 meals a day and a bed.
There was a promise made that never was fulfilled. But on that note, we have to stop. See, I told you we would run out of time before we had scratched the surface, which is why it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I very much appreciate you being here, and on behalf of the Norfolk Alliance for the Mentally Ill, I want to thank you for being on Mind Over Matter. Thank you.
You're most welcome.